Hello and good morning, everybody. I am hugely delighted to have Craig Houston with us today. He's the guy who broke the story on YouTube about Keir Starmer and the suspicions relating to the alleged arsonist. George Galloway has done a video on it last night, adding a lot more detail, and I will be getting Craig's reaction to that. But in the meantime, I'd just like to thank Craig for coming on. All of his links are in the description. His YouTube, his X. So please go and support his important work. He's supporting the Marines and doing some great stuff. So Craig, what got you interested in this story? How did it come on your radar?
X. I saw some people posting about it in X, and the thing that actually drove me to do something about it was the vacuum and the void created by the pure lack of information available. The fact that Keir Starmer, the government, Labour, said very little. I think the government made some comment on it at the time before the arrests, and there's just nothing. And it reminded me of the early Rudacabana Southport story when we were, the narrative was very, very peculiar. So that got my spidey senses interested in it, and information came my way about apparently, alleged things about the guy who was later arrested, and suggestions made to me about potential other property. Because the thing that was peculiar when I started looking into it was mainstream coverage talking about this connected property. And you think, well, why are you using words like that? What, is it owned by him? I think not, because if it was, it would just be described as another property owned by Keir Starmer, like the one that we know was his, because him and his wife have been outside the property clapping the nurses through COVID. So it's when you see strange reporting like that, it gets my spidey senses tickling. And I thought, well, there's more behind this. There's something peculiar going on. So that's kind of how I started.
Yeah, and I'd just like to state that, it is just a rumor that this guy's occupation is a male escort, or AKA a rent boy, referencing, a young person that's in that professional capacity. And but George Galloway did add several details about that, which we will get to. And have you found anything else out overnight, Craig?
Nothing concrete, but I alluded to it in the video that there's been a suggestion, and again, we don't know the truth. So anything is pure speculation at this point. But there are a growing number of people suggesting that this connected property or property connected to Starmer may be owned by the infamous Lord Ali. And he's a strange character, because I've not had a single man ever buy me a suit or a watch or anything like that. So I think to do so that's peculiar to start with. And then when you factor in that Lord Ali was voted, before anybody had heard of him, as Stonewall's politician of the decade. Now, Stonewall are obviously famous for getting gay rights, etc. The guy is, an open homosexual, which is, we're at 2025 now. That's not really a big thing. But to become Stonewall's politician of the decade when nobody's heard of you, what have you been doing? And Stonewall have been very much behind the advancement of or pushing for transgender rights recently, since they had a successful battle for gay rights. They then swung their guns on the transgender issue. So, nobody knows what he done, but, he seemed to impress them. So when you throw his name into the mix, it just gets potentially very sordid, and people are, guessing this and guessing that. And the easy way to debunk all of these things is come and talk about it. Fill the void.
Yeah, when the mainstream media are in lockstep, silence like they are right now, it's very suspicious indeed.
Yeah.
So, irrespective of his occupation, how does he know to target all these properties associated with Keir Starmer? That's the big question, isn't it?
Well, 100%, and very much a massive question, because could you or I, and we have loads of people, you more than me, with the reach you've got, people who come to you with information regularly, I would imagine. You'll have a lot of sources and contacts, and you probably couldn't find out, Keir Starmer's address, this other property that's connected to him, and a vehicle that was once registered to it. So who would? And I would suggest there's only two types of people would. That's people with scary connections and, underworld or in state governments, or people who know him personally. That's it. That's kind of it. There's probably very good journalists out there that couldn't have found the connections to Keir Starmer, to the motor car or the second property. So again, and this guy, whether you love Starmer or loathe Starmer, Starmer is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It is a massive job with massive security risk consequences. So how did this guy know? It's bizarre. It's totally bonkers that, it's got to be one of those two things. There might be a third that I'm just not clever enough to find, but the only two possible reasons why somebody would know so much about the Prime Minister. And to get as far as petrol bombing them and set them on fire, and nobody's really that bothered about it, is completely insane.
Now, looking at the car that was targeted, he no longer owns that. He sold it to a neighbor, so it was still in the same vicinity. And I think it was sold a couple of years ago, which means that this person then who attacked the car would perhaps allegedly have associated the car with Keir Starmer a couple of years ago, which would put him in his late teens, which makes the story even more salacious.
I see where you're going there, Shaun, and that's a big consideration. And the other, because we've got this unknown property as well, then how does the whole thing fit? I mean, you've got this speculation about the property being owned by Ali. That just throws another bit of timber on the fire here.
It does indeed. And viewers, I mean, people are putting lots of comments in the chat right now, hypothesizing, some of them, that it might have been a honey trap. What do you think about that?
And again, that's a risk to our security as a nation. This man's the Prime Minister. Can you imagine if somebody had put attempted petrol bomb Trump Towers or any address associated to Donald Trump or any other world leader of any size and scale at all, anywhere in the world? We would know everything about it. And Galloway mentioned on his video about it, you would see the newspapers full of photographs, background, interviews with the bloody teachers that he had. That's the level this would be at if this was any other world leader, bar ours.
Do you know anything about the second arsonist that was arrested?
No, and again, it's very peculiar, isn't it? The only thing we have is an age. I don't even know if we've got a confirmed sex of the second arsonist that's been arrested. But again, it's happened in one of the biggest airports in the world. Again, connected to one of the top 10 world leaders, and by occupation, not by performance or ability, I may add. And it's like, let's not talk about it. It is absolutely bonkers. And anybody with half a brain's got to smell a rat here and know that there's a reason we're not getting this information, and the only thing we can consider is it's because it's damning to Keir Starmer. But we need to keep going back to the facts. This man is a Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. It's a massive interest and concern for anybody with half a brain in their head. They want to know, because the security of our country, it could, hey, for all we know, this guy could be a link to Russia through some sort of cell or whatever. We don't know, but somebody does. So why are we not? Why are we? If he's not that serious, then you would kind of like to ease the concerns of the public, and even more reason to tell us. And the fact they're not telling us just gets more smelly as every hour goes by.
Right, I'm just going to read this article then about the second arsonist, and I'll get your thoughts on it. So it says here, police made second arrest over Keir Starmer arson attacks, swooping on a suspect 26 at Luton Airport. These attacks have targeted the Prime Minister. The 26-year-old was arrested around 1:45 p.m. on Saturday at London Luton Airport on suspicion of conspiracy to commit arson with intent to endanger life. The arrest was made by counter-terrorism officers from the Eastern Region Special Operations Unit. The man has been taken into police custody in London. So they have said it's a man now. The arrest relates to 3 incidents: a vehicle fire in Northwest 5 on NW5 on 8th of May, a fire at the entrance of property in North 7 on 11th of May, fire at a residential address in NW5 in the early hours of 12th of May. This arrest follows the arrest of 21-year-old Roman of Sydenham on Thursday, who appeared in court charged with 3 counts of arson with intent to endanger life. It is understood that the 3 arson targets were the Prime Minister's £2 million North London property, which was set alight on Monday night, just days after the torching of a car and a flat, which the Prime Minister had previously owned. Met Police are saying all 3 targets of the arson attacks have previous connections with a high-profile public figure. Officers from the Met's Counter-Terrorism Command are leading the investigation. And Kier has let the 4-bedroom house in Kentish Town to his sister-in-law on a peppercorn rent since he moved into Downing Street last year. The blaze damaged the porch of the property, but firefighters were able to bring it under control within 20 minutes, stopping it from spreading further indoors. The doors of 2 homes linked to the Prime Minister in North London both suffered fire damage within 24 hours of each other. This came after a Toyota RAV4 on Sir Keir Street burst into flames on VE Day. The owner of the vehicle, a neighbour of the Prime Minister, is understood to have thought that the fire started because of a faulty battery. The hybrid car was completely destroyed. Sadiq Khan said the 3 fires have left the Prime Minister's family feeling frightened for their safety. He told LBC Radio, "Don't underestimate the ripples of fear that his wife and the kids felt when they will have to read this stuff in the paper. But for the grace of God, they are safe, thankfully, in Downing Street. They've got a good protection team. Anyone with information is asked to call the police." And then it gives an information number. So there's the latest details, Craig. Any thoughts on those?
Again, there's more questions than answers. And we live in a society today, whether it's good or bad, I'm not sure, where we want instant information due to the growth of social media. And unfortunately, I know people in the press, I know a number of journalists, they tend to be sports journalists, oddly enough, because of a previous life I had 10 years ago. And they've always told me that investigative journalism is dead as far as newspapers are concerned, because they don't sell papers anymore and everything's online. Incomes are down, so they don't have time to, an editor tell a journalist, you can go away and spend 2 days or 2 weeks on that story and build one story over that term. So we don't have those opportunities anymore. For people slaughter the mainstream for having no investigative journalists, and that's why we don't. If we still bought newspapers, we could probably still justify them. So we've got this hunger for information, and people like yourself and myself try, we sort of fill that void a little bit, and the public just want to know. And when you hear things like that, where again there's no really any answers there, people are now asking questions. Well, who's this 27-year-old? Where's he from? Is he Ukrainian? Is he potentially a male model? And all these questions come again, where for days in now, the public should be able to know a lot more than we have just now.
Right, so we'll play Galloway then and get the extra details he provided, and I'll get your thoughts. And, he did start out with a disclaimer that it is abominable that anyone's house has suffered like this, and he doesn't wish harm to come to anyone. And I'd just like to reiterate that as well. From this channel, we don't wish harm upon anyone, and we want to get to the bottom of what's happened here. So let's see what George says, and then I'll pause it and I'll get your thoughts.
Quite quickly, the British police apprehended a 21-year-old Ukrainian from Sydenham. Now, Sydenham is a very long way in the south of London from the properties which were all in the north of London. It's not clear, because we haven't been told, how the police managed so swiftly to trace the arsonist. And the attempt to create fire, to endanger life and property, is a serious offense. And I'm going to try very hard not to stand on any legal eggshells that might be problematic for the prosecution of the case. The last thing, of course, we would like to do is adversely affect the course of justice by probing too deeply into the arson that now on social media practically everybody is talking about. I asked the following question on Twitter, and 1 million people viewed it in 21.5 hours. My question was this: how did the 21-year-old Ukrainian male model, for that is what he turned out to be, know the location of former properties of the Prime Minister Keir Starmer and current properties owned but not occupied by Keir Starmer?
There's only two options, isn't there, really? Either the kid had visited and knew these locations in the car, or he'd been fed intelligence. What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I can't see a third option. There may very well be one, but the common sense and logical answer to that is, yeah, you have to be either intelligence or fed intelligence, or stuff that you know through your own private dealings with these people. So, I get that. I don't know what one's scarier, if I'm perfectly honest.
Well, we know Starmer loves all things Ukrainian, so it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
And a motor car formerly owned by Keir Starmer. How could a 21-year-old with, by all accounts, little command of the English language, how could he have known where to find these properties and this motor car? And why would he want to set them on fire? Why would he want to commit the serious offense of arson to the endangerment of life, which, if convicted, will see him in prison for many years? These are legitimate questions, and they would normally, in normal circumstances, if Britain had journalists, if Britain had broadcasters, if Britain had the kind of journalists that even in the 1960s, during the Profumo scandal, never mind in the 1970s, in the era of World in Action, in the era of the Insight team in the Sunday Times, or even at the low end of the market, Neville Beck, of not so fond memory, of the not so fondly remembered News of the World. In normal times, when we had normal journalists, we would today know all about this.
I'd like to say that we've got Craig Houston on the screen, who was the first person to put it on YouTube, folks, and his link is in the top of the description box for his channel and his X. So please subscribe, and he's doing a lot of great stuff, campaigning for the Marines and going against the government policies that are just absolutely insane. But let's keep going with this for now before we bring Craig back in.
This 21-year-old Ukrainian male model, we'd have had pictures of him in his underpants. Actually, oh wait, we have more or less pictures of him in his underpants. Now, when I say male model, I'm not necessarily talking euphemistically. He may well have been a male model, but starting out in his career as a male model, he advertised himself as a male model at the extraordinary low rate of £20 per hour. Moreover, he was ready for the first photo shoot to give the first hour for free.
Craig, where do you think Galloway got that information from? The £20 an hour stuff?
I don't know. I must have missed that, but it's an incredible piece of information and a big thing to say. Listen, love George Galloway. I love George Galloway. One thing George Galloway isn't is stupid. So he knows by making claims that can't be stood up, would put him in a dangerous position, and I don't think he would be joining in any rumours if he didn't have something to back it up. So fair play to him.
Yeah, he definitely would be protecting his arse on this one. I'll keep playing it. I'm just going to mute you because there's a bit of feedback.
House of words.
So this was a young man of great entrepreneurial spirit. No doubt he was determined to break into the world of male models. Now, the cynical amongst you might be imagining that the man that is under arrest was ready to offer other services. And you would be right. He also advertised himself as a roofer. He was ready to fix your roof. I don't know, maybe fix your back door at the same time as fixing your roof. But I have no evidence that he was, as is being widely now reported, a rent boy. And even if he was a rent boy, that does not necessarily link him to the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, at all. I've told you many times, but let me say it again, to clear up any misapprehension that there might be. I don't know or care anything about the sexuality of the victim of these crimes. And it's not relevant what the sexuality of the victim of these crimes is. I don't know if Keir Starmer prefers men or women, and I don't care. I don't care whether he's a top or a bottom. I don't care if he's active or passive. I don't know, and I don't care. But if our Prime Minister is at risk, either from terrorist attack or from a blackmailer, then I believe that we must be told. We must be told if our Prime Minister was the victim of arson attacks mounted by a foreign national on behalf of a foreign power. Or
what doesn't make any sense is that, you know, the kid, if he's Ukrainian and he's pro Starmer because Starmer's supplying Ukraine, then why would he be going against Starmer if Starmer's accommodating Ukraine? Would that just eliminate the intelligence side of it and suggest the other side of it is more likely? What do you think, Craig?
Yeah, I've just stuck some earphones in, mate, because I think it was getting a bit of feedback here. That solved the problem. Yeah, again, it's just totally bizarre, and I think as a citizen of the United Kingdom, I would prefer it not to be an intelligence-led campaign. The other thing is, I don't know how successful it was. I think it sort of bumped a porch, and if it was a terror campaign, I think it would probably be more significant an attack and probably more successful. However, there's one thing to consider. We have now got 2 arrests. That's a bit odd. But if it turned out that the second person arrested had similar extracurricular activities to the first one, I would actually be more comfortable with that, because it's not then terror related. That's the big fear for me as a citizen, is that it could be terror related. And I would severely hope it isn't. So the other option, that he knows him through personal contact, would actually be more pleasing for me. But then, if he's putting himself in these situations, that's probably a risk to our establishment. So it could potentially look at his downfall. I mean, you look at the Portillo things back in the day. These things led to the fall of very important people, and this could. The best thing for Starmer would be if it was some sort of terrorist plot, because then he's just a victim. If he's helped bring this on himself, that's a whole different can of worms.
So you're saying that it's safer for the country if it's a lover's spat?
Very much so. But not so good for Mr. Starmer.
Let's see what George continues to say.
Or a foreign organization, that much is obvious. He was a Ukrainian. What kind of a Ukrainian? His father says a patriotic Ukrainian who does not speak Russian. That makes him a Western Ukrainian. That makes him a supporter of government of President Zelensky, that Prime Minister Keir Starmer is the world's foremost advocate for. Would not on the face of it, only on the face of it, seem likely that this attack on Keir Starmer's property, his private property, had anything to do with disappointment in Keir Starmer's political attitude to the Ukraine. But we need to know that. We need to be sure that this person setting these fires in the Prime Minister's properties was not acting for another state, was not acting for another foreign power. And he could have been, for all that we now know. He could have been acting for the Russians. He could have been acting for the Israelis. He could have been acting for Ouagadougou. He could have been acting for organized crime. We don't know. And that is the point. This is a matter of heightened public interest. Just because all the reporters in Fleet Street have put down their pens and written nothing about this does not make it other than a matter of the highest public interest. Just
well said, George. And if you've just joined us, we've got Craig Houston, who broke this story onto YouTube. He had the balls to put it out there when nobody else had. And I'm still seeing an absence. I expected it to blow up today when I got on my phone, searched it, and only George Galloway, as far as I'm aware, with a sizable following on YouTube, is the person who's spoke about this. Have you noticed any other more followed people reporting on this, Craig?
Not really. And I don't know why. I think last summer might have helped get to the situation. But you said, I'm brave or I've got a set of balls or something. It's either that or probable stupidity in reporting this, because there was so many people arrested. A good pal of mine, Silver Fox, he was arrested a few months ago over something he put out in his YouTube channel. So I think this is a byproduct of previous actions by the government that people are probably scared to say anything about it. Whereas I like to think I've got a good, sensible understanding of what you can and can't say. And I always obviously try to remain at the right side of the law for my own protection. And so that's probably why there's probably a lot of people would like to say things about it, but are a bit scared to, in case they end up the next statistic in a two-tiered judiciary system that we evidently have.
Indeed, it's an absolute minefield out there with the algorithmic strangulation. I've lost my channel twice when we were covering the Epstein story, and we're still, even with Trump getting in, we're still treading on eggshells, having to change certain words because if they hit a threshold on the algorithm, then there's going to be trouble. We recently had on the channel an ex-Royal Marine who went to prison for a Facebook post, and he might be a good one that you'd be interested in on your channel, because I see you posting, stuff from that genre. But all right, I'll keep going with Galloway. Let's see what he says next.
just because the mainstream television has not broadcast any of these questions does not make it other than a matter of the highest public interest. And of course, if our Prime Minister has left himself open to blackmail, well, arguably, we need to know that even more. Because if any minister, Keir Starmer or any Prime Minister, has left himself open to blackmail, that means our country and its interests are open to blackmail. How could we know that a particular course of policy, either domestic or foreign, had not been influenced by a prime ministerial vulnerability to blackmail? So I think the country needs to be told. And on the face of it, we have a mystery here that simply must be addressed.
Craig, based on your research then, how prolific do you think the people at the top have been compromised?
Potentially massively, and this may be why we're not hearing a lot about it. And as George alludes to, if the security of our country's been compromised by potentially the Prime Minister's actions as Prime Minister or previous to becoming Prime Minister, then that is a real big concern. This story is massive. Either way, whether it's a state-funded action against our Prime Minister or something from his personal private past, either way, the implications are huge. And it beggars belief. I really don't know, unless there's some super injunctions that have been put out, and that's possibly why some are not want to talk about it. But it beggars belief that this big case, such a dangerous thing, is practically all we're getting is the basic little bits of bread put out. There's no feast at the back of it, and I find that most peculiar.
Indeed. And let's do a quick poll of the viewers then. Viewers, please put a 1 in the chat if you think this arsonist is involved in an alleged lover's spat. Put a 2 in the chat if you think the suspect is some kind of honey trap, intelligence, compromising politician situation. Put a 3 in the chat if you think there is nothing suspicious here. Keir Starmer's properties have been targeted for matters completely unrelated to 1 or 2. Looks like we've got lots of 1s coming in. Lots of 1s. Most people are going for the spat. A few 2s. And also, if you've not yet subscribed to Craig's channel, I'm putting the link in the live chat. The link is also at the top of the description if you're watching this on replay, as is a link to his X. So you can watch him over there. Let's get a bit more Galloway. I think he's finished this soon.
How did a 21-year-old Ukrainian male model know the address of properties owned by Keir Starmer in the 1990s? How did he know the identity of a motor vehicle which has not been owned by Keir Starmer for some years? These are vitally important questions. And millions of people who have responded to me on social media demonstrate amply that these are matters of public interest
and national security.
And so, who's going to answer them? I call on the Prime Minister to make clear if he knows or has ever met the individuals who have been arrested for alleged arson attacks on his property. I want to know if the Prime Minister knows them. I want to know what the Prime Minister knows and when he knew it. I don't want to be the George Whig in this picture. And George Whig had parliamentary privilege and used it ruthlessly to get to the truth of the Profumo affair in the early 1960s. I have no parliamentary privilege, but I do have a voice that is heard. And so I'm asking on behalf of, I believe, a substantial section of the British public and the international community at that. Did Keir Starmer ever meet the 21-year-old male model now under arrest and charged with arson attacks against his property, current and former? Now, I mentioned a significant new fact that emerged last evening, which is that a second man, this time not 21, but 26, a 26-year-old man was arrested by police at Luton Airport, where he or she, or however they identify, was seeking to board a plane. We have no idea of the identity of that 26-year-old man, even though it caused quite a kerfuffle at Luton Airport when they were arrested. We deserve to know. It would be significant to know. For example, if the person arrested, the 26-year-old man, if he was a Ukrainian. It would be important to know if he was a male model.